Why do people fight for a nation? What does it even mean to be a part of a nation? Generally, you have a shared cultural, shared experiences. You have all of those things which build some sort of connection to the past and then association with everybody else. So that even if you disagree on various things, there's still unifying components within your culture that you can both hearken back to and look on with a certain element of pride. How does a group of people that have individual objectives for their life, different preferences and whatnot, but how do they live in society with one another where they can cooperate in order to achieve something? And at other times, leave each other alone when they disagree, but still feel a sense of unity, camaraderie, and connection. How do you break that apart? You have to challenge the overall narrative, both of the history, like how did you get to where you are today? Because if you take pride in it, well, then it's something worth preserving. And even if you think that there's a problem with it, you might want to fix those problems. If you view U.S. history through the lens, the philosophy of the Declaration of Independence, we believe, we find these truths self-evident that all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, you can look back and say, we didn't live up to that, which is maybe why in the preamble of the Constitution it says to create a more perfect union. But that sentiment is, I believe, true and noble. It's a pretty strong philosophy to build a culture around. But what if I come back later and I tell you they just wanted liberty for white men because women couldn't vote at the time? And you know what? They just really didn't want to pay their taxes. That's what this was really about. So what do you have? You have a white patriarchal society that was rooted in enslaving certain people based off of the color of their skin. And they set up this system because it would be beneficial for them financially. And all of your other notions about what a wonderful philosophical concept this was, that was marketing. That was marketing to help rich white guys get what they want at the expense of other people. That's all it was. Well, right at the bat, completely undermined why you would want to fight for such a culture in the first place. So once I start undermining the cultural ties that bind, now let's admit a couple of things. We can look back and say there are elements of that statement that are true. But then all of a sudden when we put it back in context and we recognize, well, wait a second, every society at the world at that time had some form of institution of slavery. Every single society at that time, had some of the bad things, the negative aspects of it that we just discussed. So what was different? I mean, to say in 1776, you now have somebody say, no, we're all created equal. And even if we're not living up to it, that is the standard. That's the truth. That was revolutionary. That's incredible. And it's easy to look back now and say, well, of course that's the way it's supposed to be. It wasn't of course back then. They fought for that. They died for that. They might not have fully lived up to it, but they set us on the path to be able to achieve a level of individual liberty, prosperity, and security that is unheard of in world history. But if I erase all that, and I view it purely from this lens without any context, I can convince you, especially if you're a younger person, I can convince you that this is all bad, especially if you can still look around at society and find certain inequities. Some disparities of outcome exist because of bad policy. Some disparities of outcome exist because you're lazy and that dude works hard. That's not an injustice. But if I can convince you that it actually is injustice, well, what am I doing? I've taken away your shared history. I've taken away your shared connection with your neighbor. And now I'm supplanting that with a different narrative, because your nuclear family, that's a tool of the patriarchy. Right? Your country, that's just racist, bigoted, and discriminating. Right? Your very identity, well, I don't know, if you are a certain skin color or you're heterosexual or whatever else, well, you're part of the oppressor class. We have to change the nature of your identity. What if it doesn't correspond with reality? What objective reality? Postmodernism tells us there is no objective reality. There is no objective truth. There is only lived experience. There's only oppressor and oppressed. And if you're an oppressor, you're a bad guy that needs to be taken down and there's nothing you can do. It's the original sin theory with no redemption. I do all of those things, and now I have a very powerful group of very disaffected people that have a philosophy rooted in nothing other than the movement, looking at the institutions which form culture and we tend to look toward politics, but politics is downstream from culture. Or your school system, your academia, media, the arts and entertainment, Hollywood, they're the ones that are actually telling you the stories about who you are, what your country is, and everything else. And if they've all decided on a particular narrative, now all of a sudden your feet are firmly planted in nothing, well then that identity crisis provides me a huge opportunity to be able to destabilize what it is and replace it with what I want it to be. Without truth, and without the believing that there's such a thing as objective truth, how do you even arrive at love? How do you arrive at logic? How do you arrive at science? How do you arrive at justice? What is justice if there's no such thing as objective truth? How do you define it? And what I see is a lot of people that want to ignore the fundamentals and then chase after these things that give them this temporary sense of meaning or purpose or community or whatever else, but ultimately it all rings hollow because they're trying to replace something that is not going to be replaced by a movement or a feeling or a sexual act or whatever else it is. I think, I don't think a majority of Americans, like if you sat them down, would sit there and say, yes, I genuinely believe that if you identify as X, Y, and Z, well, then reality has changed or adjusted that to make it so. I don't think they really believe that. But what does it matter if they're not willing to say it's wrong?
Yeah.
Men are especially under attack right now. Those men that believe in traditional standards of what they're supposed to do as men, as husbands, as fathers, as protectors, as providers, they're all being told that these are toxic attributes. And it's like, no, when you look at things like aggression, when you look at things like a capacity and a capability for violence, those are not toxic in and of themselves. They're morally neutral. And I will tell you this, if the good guys don't know how to use those things, they're going to be ruled by the bad guys.